northeast of England, which is the part of the country that's known by the fact that Scotland wants it but cannot have it, and England does not want it but will not let Scotland have it. And so I want to start by sharing with you a story, a true story that comes from my part of the world, told by an Anglican priest in Witton Gilbert about something that happened in a church service about a year ago. And a young girl approached her and asked her what she needed to do in order to become a vicar. She'd been watching carefully what the vicar had been doing throughout the service and thought that this was something that she might like to emulate. The priest carefully took her through the process. She would need to go through some interviews, spend time at theological college, and begin practicing ministry for several years before she was ordained as a minister. The young girl looked at her in disbelief, nodded, and then said simply, "I think I'll just be a unicorn," she said. Ministry, as we know, is not easy. In John chapter 21, we meet with Peter confronting the full reality of that. Peter is at his most vulnerable, wondering if he will ever be let back into the fold again following his threefold denial of Jesus before the crucifixion. Perhaps wondering if he's a fraud or if there's any way back for him, recognizing that all he promised to be for Jesus had turned out to be false. Well, maybe you felt like that at some point. And of course, he too, despite his denial, had gathered with the other disciples in a locked room and received the Spirit as the risen Christ breathed upon them and said, "As the Father has sent me, so I send you." And in the story immediately before this one, his heart has been full of delight as he saw the risen Christ by the seashore and jumped out of the boat in order to greet him. At breakfast, they've shared bread and fish together as Jesus has served the disciples, guest, cook, and host all at the same time. But in this intimate moment, as Jesus takes him to one side, how does he feel? I wonder if he felt something of an impostor, with all the trappings of the ministry, but with none of it in the right place. Or as someone famously said, all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order. Most people in ministry, lay or ordained, at one point or another, have, and for some most of the time, wondered whether or not they are still called. Whatever their gifts and qualities, however obvious their calling might be to others, they still ask themselves from time to time, can it really be me? In their worst moments, they might even feel like Peter, vulnerable and adrift, wondering if they have the strength to keep on keeping up the pretense. Many in ministry live with a persistent sense of self-doubt, and sometimes, in their most negative moments, a sense that they are frauds. A dear friend of mine, now a supernumerary, rang me up a few weeks ago and revealed to me that next year he'll be celebrating 30 years since his ordination. "They still haven't found me out," he said, tongue-in-cheek on the phone. Most of us will have felt like that from one time or another, whether we're in professional ministry or not. A sense that somehow we don't deserve to be where we are, or that we're simply not very good at our job, or that someone else is much more competent, or that we're pulling the wool over everyone's eyes, and that we're about to be unmasked as a fraud. It's what some people describe as impostor syndrome. Some of the most successful people in the world have felt themselves imposters. After she won her second Oscar, the actress Jane Fonda told a talk show host that she felt that she was a fraud and that one day the Academy would come and take away her award, declaring her talentless. The acclaimed poet and author Maya Angelou once lamented, "I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out." Other well-known people such as Jacinda Ardern, Tom Hanks, Michelle Obama have all said similar things. It can lead to a distortion of our identity and our vision, which either tells us to give up altogether or to work harder and harder to compensate for our imagined inadequacy in order to establish our credentials. A novel by Ann Tyler called Morgan's Passing tells the story of a middle-aged man from Baltimore called Morgan, who's managed to pass through people's lives by assuming the roles that they need and gratifying their expectations. And one day Morgan is watching a puppet show at the church on a Sunday afternoon, and a man appears from behind the stage a few minutes into the show and shouts, "Is there a doctor here?" After a few seconds in which there is no response from the audience, Morgan gets up to his feet and says, "What seems to be the trouble?" The puppeteer's pregnant wife has gone into labor, and a birth seems likely at any moment. So Morgan puts the couple into the back of his car, and they set off to the hospital. But halfway there, the husband cries, "The baby is coming." Morgan pulls up to the curb and calmly sends the husband off to the newsagent to buy newspapers, which will act as makeshift towels and bed sheets, and then Morgan delivers the baby. He sees them to the emergency room at the hospital, and then he disappears. After everything has calmed down, the couple ask for Dr. Morgan so that they can thank him, but nobody in the hospital seems to know who he is. And a few days later, the couple leave the hospital unable to express their gratitude. Well, several months pass, but later, as they're pushing the baby in the pram one day, they see Morgan walking on the other side of the street, and they rush over to show him the healthy baby and to thank him for bringing their child into the world. In a fit of honesty, he admits to them that he is not a doctor at all, but he runs the local hardware store. But they needed a doctor, and a doctor in those circumstances was not too hard to pull off. It's an image thing, he says. You work out people's expectations, and then you fit into them. He says he's been doing it all of his life, pretending to be doctors, lawyers, ministers, counselors, depending on the situation. And then he confides, I would never pretend to be a plumber or impersonate a butcher. They would find me out in 20 seconds. Eugene Peterson, in his book, The Contemplative Pastor, argues that many ministers understand this at a very early stage in their work. It's the image thing. The parts that meet people's expectations are the parts that can be easily faked. We can impersonate a pastor, he says, without being a pastor. A bit like running around in fancy dress, being mistaken for the real thing. We can fool some of the people some of the time, but we can't fool all the people all of the time, and that particularly includes ourselves. No wonder sometimes we might feel inadequate. But I wonder if the story of the recommissioning of Peter is in fact an encouragement to bring from a different direction when we're thinking about ministry. In this story, we're encouraged to change our mindset about our calling and what it is that we are being called to. It's also a deeply permissive encounter because it encourages us to recognize that our failure will always be held by Christ in the context of love. We are called to minister from a different place, not as fakes, but as resemblances, those who mirror Jesus and those who mirror the way of love. Jesus asks Peter the same question 3 times. Do you love me? Perhaps a conscious echo of Peter's threefold denial of Jesus before his trial. But the repetition draws attention to the deep mystery of our response, our desire to commit on the surface without opening our eyes to the truth about ourselves, the elephant in the room. In Peter's case, the rock on which the church is built, there is both intense desire, but also hesitancy. As one writer puts it, in a relationship of love, we sometimes discover that the other has understood us better than we have understood ourselves and has been waiting for us to wake up to the truth. Peter is being invited to wake up to the truth about himself and to receive back from Jesus his ministry as a gift of love. Now that's a constant invitation to all of us, whether we are lay or ordained. Love, we discover in John's Gospel, is at the heart of our relationship with Jesus, of God's relationship with the world, and our relationship with one another. Love is at the heart of the gift that Christ offers, which calls us into being and patiently makes possible the response that we offer. At its most basic, it's simply a way of saying that the being and act of ministry does not come primarily from us, but as a response to the gift of God. We can only minister fully to the extent that we are held within that passion, within that desire of God. As Tom Wright puts it, the secret of ministry relies on us discovering our deep down love for Christ, which gives us an opportunity to express that love in acts of love for others, where work is given us for us to do, even whilst we continue to be healed of the hurts and the failures that beset us. It is love which transforms our hesitancy into deeper and deeper desire for God, from which our love for others flows. It is an act of the Spirit, and only through full reliance upon God, through Christ, can we make such a bold claim. When you come to think about it, it is an audacious claim, one that few of us would dare to make had we not seen others continuing to do the same, imitating Jesus in daily acts of declaring the good news, celebrating the sacraments, serving the needy, ministering to the sick, welcoming the stranger, seeking the lost. Ministers are those who are called to walk daily into the joys and the ruins of this world's life, because everybody, every community needs someone who will remind them that Jesus Christ is in their midst as they minister to them in compassion, his justice and his love to all, regardless of who they are and who they might have been. Against this yardstick, all of us, of course, are inadequate. All of us impostors. The dog collar will not hide us unless the power to exercise it comes from elsewhere. It is an act of faith, sustained by the vows that we make, the constancy of Christ in the power of the Spirit, the prayers of others that surround us daily, and the proclamation at our ordination that we are worthy. There will be moments, and perhaps sometimes even days and weeks, when we will struggle to believe this, but it is the only truth that will sustain ministry in the long term. Of course, we are inadequate to the task if we think it is only ours to do. But when we recognize that the task is God's, not ours, and that we are invited to share in it, then our perspective begins to shift. There is humility in recognizing, as the Romero prayer puts it, we cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in realizing that. This enables us to do something and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and do the rest. That is what we are about. Let me close with a story which I told at the conference, but I think in this context bears repeating. It's a story which Sonia Hicks, a former president of the conference, told me last year at an ordination service. And I was sat with Sonia having a cup of tea after the service, and she told me that most days she remembers the great acclamation of the congregation during the Methodist ordination service, when the congregation are asked of the ordinands, are they worthy? They are worthy, the congregation acclaims at the top of its voice. And Sonia said that every time ministry becomes difficult, she remembers those words and that acclamation have been enough to sustain her. Faith, remember you are worthy. Remember you are loved. You are worthy because the church has tested you and affirmed you, but most of all because you are worthy in God's sight in Jesus Christ. You are God's child. And every day as you journey with and towards Christ in your life in your ministry, you are testifying to that fact. That was true as you began your journey as a disciple, as you've traveled through ministry, and as you take on the responsibilities of being a chair of district. You are here because you deserve to be and because the church and God have called you to be. And as well as being president, as a member of the chairs meeting, I can tell you that we are so pleased to have such an outstanding minister and person amongst us. But as you begin your ministry as chair, I pray that you and all of us will continue to discover the wonder of ministry, not in ourselves, but in God's gift in and through us, and our response to Christ, and our determination to walk with him. It is God who in his Spirit gives us the power to exercise it. Amen.